I now invite our next speaker, Ms. Nadine Moawad, coordinator of the Association for Progressive Communications Sexual Rights Program. Ms. Moawad, you are kindly invited to take the rostrum.
Thank you. Thank you. This is a rare opportunity for me to take a selfie with my own head, so I will use the last 10 seconds. So thank you very much. I'm very happy to be speaking today on behalf of civil society, and I'm very happy for this opportunity and quite honored. And I want to tell a personal story because as a kid who grew up in a small Lebanese town in the 90s, the issues that we discuss here today of internet freedom, access, freedom of speech, gender and sexuality, these are very personal issues to me because they reflect my own struggle for freedom, for knowledge, for community, and for love. So little did I imagine when I was a kid, a teenager growing up, that one day we would come to multi-stakeholder settings and to the United Nations and discuss these issues as political issues. And so I wanted to invite us in this last closing ceremony to remember that moment where we first connected to the internet and that infinite feeling of possibility. Because that, I believe, is the feeling of liberation that has to guide us as we make decisions about how we govern the internet. And so we've had these amazing technological developments in the last few decades, mostly driven by capitalism. And I think the greatest advancement has been the internet. But we also know that capitalism as an economic model will not last forever, that it is eating up our planet, it's widening the gap between the rich and the poor, the 1% get richer, the rest of us get poorer. And we have to ask ourselves, if we believe that the internet is a facilitator for equality, for justice, for empowering people, why is it that in the last 10, 20 years, we've seen the greatest inequalities of our time? We have to ask ourselves that. Because we all come here with the belief that technology is an equalizer, and we come here with the belief that the internet will bring good to people, right? That it will lift us up somehow from these models that aren't working and take us to better egalitarian, equitable systems. So we also have to ask ourselves, how come the internet that we used to log into, and those of you who are a bit older will remember logging in the late 90s and the 2000s, when everything was possible, and yet now every interaction is monitored, regulated, surveyed, and every virtual part of our identity is sold for profit and is monetized and is privatized. These are the questions we have to grapple with. And so when we come to spaces like the IGF, and we talk about human rights, and we talk about the right to privacy, the right to human dignity, the right to anonymity, all of these issues online, sometimes it's a bit strange to sit around the same table and discuss things that are such fundamental human rights. And so we have to ask ourselves, how are we framing the questions around these issues? Because you know the saying in debates that those who frame the question win the debate, right? So I'll start with the first question, for example, of freedom of speech. How are we framing our discussion on freedom of speech? Freedom of speech is not the freedom to offend people who are weaker than you. It's not the freedom to push down people who are already battling against complexes of military, of war, of racism, of genocide. It's not the freedom to see someone who's struggling because of structural issues and then bash them and say, look, freedom of speech. Yeah? Freedom of speech is our right to offend those who are untouchable, those who are in power, those who are protected by media, by banks, by armies. It's our right to offend those people. That is what we understand as freedom of speech. Otherwise, it is called hegemonic speech. Yeah? So it is our right, for example, to demand of Arab governments to release immediately people like Ala, Hisham, and Basil, and all of the bloggers that are detained because of tweets and blog posts. This is what we believe freedom of speech is. Also, freedom of speech is the right of African Americans to say loudly and clearly, Black Lives Matter. One of the most beautiful campaigns happened on the internet recently was Black Lives Matter, and they had to say it 100 million times to get people to listen to them. Yeah? And freedom of speech also, wait for it, is the right for Brazilian activists to come to the IGF and to carry a banner that says, free basics equals free of basic human rights. That is what we defend as freedom of speech. Yeah? And we see, my friends, it's not the governments who will protect freedom of speech, it's not the corporations, it's not the police. Only people who will protect it is us, by our relentlessness and our sheer insistence that we will not shut up about our right to say what we want to say. The other example I want to talk about is access, because we've talked a lot about access in this forum. And remember, how we frame the question, those who frame the question win the debate, right? So the debate about access is mostly controlled by those who have access, deciding on behalf of those who don't have access what they need. And I'll tell you a story about my mother. My mother joined the internet because she heard from her neighbor in the town that she could raise a virtual farm with animals, crops. She could feed things, she could look after them. She got very excited about this idea of a farm, yeah? She plays on the farm all day, she tells me about it, sometimes she sends me photos, etc. My mother is not interested in using the internet for information because she doesn't trust it, yeah? She would actually be an excellent content producer. She could populate the internet with better content than most of the information that is out there. But yet, when we talk about access, we don't think of my mother as a content producer, as someone engaged in this internet. We see her as someone who will use the internet, for example, to talk to her local government. It so happens her local government is her cousin. If she wants to talk to him, she stands on the balcony and she yells across the street. But yet we sort of frame her, when we frame this discussion as, oh, these poor people who are not connected, we need to bring them internet. We are disempowering people instead of empowering them, and instead of putting the agency where it belongs. Yeah? And technology by default is a product of creativity. So people understand technology, but somehow when we make it into this cryptic, complicated issue, we are disempowering them. I also want to talk about anonymity. I can't see my timer. Anyway, so I want to talk also about anonymity. Because anonymity, the debate around anonymity is framed in a way where anonymity causes crimes, which is also such a strange debate. If I got my bag stolen, I went to the security, I said my bag stolen, he will never say to me, oh, I'm sorry, your criminal is anonymous. Right? He won't say, oh, damn it, anonymity, we should have scanned everybody and put chips in everyone to monitor where they went, otherwise we have crime. Crime by default is anonymous. And we figure out ways to work around it without saying, because of crime, we have to rid people of anonymity. Because the fact is, my friends, anonymity saves lives. And a lot of people are free and alive today because of their right to be anonymous. And now we have to go to extra lengths. It's getting harder and harder to be anonymous, and they're talking about making encryption illegal. Yeah? We have to fight for these things. We have to retain these things. And finally, I must speak a little bit about sex, because that is my main job with APC. I look at the intersection of sexuality and technology. And if we think about sex, sexual rights as fundamentally your right to have good sex. This is what we advocate for. What does it mean? It means you can have healthy sex, you have all the information you need, you can talk about it openly, you're having consensual sex, yeah, nobody's forcing you, you have access to contraception, you can choose your partner, you have access to free, legal abortions, etc. We're talking about a set of rights that are sexual rights. And we fought very hard for the last decades to get the United Nations and to get local governments to recognize that sexual rights are human rights, including the rights of LGBTs and the rights of queer people and people of diverse sexualities. And so we come to think about the internet in relation to sexual rights. Because the internet has a lot to do with sex. We all have sex online. We all use the internet to look up sex information. It's a political act, particularly for people whose sex lives don't make it into the mainstream. Yeah? For women, for LGBTs, for people with disabilities, for people of color, for all these categories of people whose sexualities are still very taboo and we don't want to talk about them. The internet enables us to discuss them. And so we have to keep having these conversations about sex at the IGF, in internet governance spaces, because we have to unpack the complexities of the relationship of sexuality with technology. For example, who decides what is harmful content? Who decides what is pornographic? Why do we rid young people of their agency to decide of what is harmful for them and what is not? Yeah? Why do we put young people under a blanket and say, protect them, censor? Yeah? What do we censor using this blanket because we want to protect young people instead of recognizing that young people use the internet better than any other generation can use it and can make decisions about what is safe for them and what is healthy for them and what is right for them. And embedded in all of this is the question also of consent. We started talking a little bit at this IGF about consent, and I think we have to move forward and discuss more. How do we embed the idea of consent, meaningful consent, into our technology, our design, our structures, and our discussions, and our politics? So, to summarize, my friends, I think it is a time for us to be braver, to be bolder, and to demand what we want to demand, what we believe is right, and to up our efforts to keep the internet an internet that we love, an internet that can transform our lives. And if there's anything we know about the internet, is that it always has amazing surprises for us. Finally, I want to name, I was asked to name a civil society colleague who was in the IGF for a long time, Ronnie Coven from the World Press Freedom Committee, and who is not with us anymore. This is the first IGF. But anyway, keep fighting for a free and open internet. If you're not going to fight for it, we're going to lose it. Yeah, very soon. Thank you.